Fresh Energy. She is the Director of Electricity Markets there at Fresh Energy, and she's going to present today on community solar.
Great.
Come on up.
Thanks for having me here tonight. I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy to see so many faces here too to learn about community solar, so this will be fantastic. I'm just curious, first of all, how many folks here are kind of installers or people that are within the industry? Okay, great. How many people here are citizens that are really interested in being a part of a community solar project? Okay, great. That's very helpful. Excellent. So some of you are going to know some of the details that I'm talking about here. I'm going to try to make my remarks a little bit more broad so that we can hopefully bring everybody along and have this conversation together. I encourage you to ask questions. If there's something that you see that you don't understand in the slides, feel free to raise your hand as we go, and I'll be happy to answer clarifying questions and those kinds of things. I'll also try not to go too fast and wander too far into the weeds. I'm sure that your glazed eyes will tell me if I have accomplished that or not. So very quickly, I'll tell you a little bit about Fresh Energy, a little bit about solar in Minnesota. I understand that most of you are probably going to be already very familiar with this, but just as an introduction. And then I'm going to focus my comments on community solar in Minnesota. I want to talk about why community solar as a policy is a good idea for Minnesota. I also want to discuss what is exactly meant by community solar. MRES literally wrote the report about different kinds of community solar, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we specifically mean in this particular context. I want to talk about the Minnesota legislation, and then of course Xcel actually has an application for a community solar program before the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. So I'll take a little bit of time to discuss that as well. And then of course, how you can help, right? So just very quickly about Fresh Energy, for those of you not acquainted with our organization, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy advocacy group. We're based in downtown St. Paul. We do work actually regionally, but obviously Minnesota policy is a core part of what we do. We work for a clean, fair, and efficient energy system. So that means that we work on renewable energy policy, energy efficiency, global warming solutions, and we also have a transportation program. I fall in the clean energy and energy efficiency policy work. And just very quickly about solar power. So those of us in the room obviously are already predisposed towards solar power. And I'm sure you probably know a lot of the reasons why solar power is a good idea. But we would argue that solar power over the long run is inevitable. And the reason that we say that is because, of course, solar power has very low running costs and repair benefits. A big part of that is because, of course, solar is a free fuel. It's going to be free for the duration of the lifetime of the module. That's a tremendous benefit. And, of course, the hedge value is enormous. I mean, this is a fuel source that obviously is not going to be going up in price over time, and that's not a guarantee that you can make of fossil fuels. Costs are falling tremendously fast for solar, and I know that you guys have heard this over and over again, but just by way of illustration, the yellow bars that you can see here are actually the estimates that were made by financial analysts about exactly where module costs are going to be, and then you can see exactly where they ended up, and you can see every time that the projections are actually higher than where the module costs were falling. So costs are falling even faster than anybody ever expected. And then finally, we also embrace solar, obviously, because we all want to live in a livable environment, particularly around climate issues. We all know that global warming is a pressing problem. Obviously, increasing the amount of energy that we receive from our renewable resources helps us to address those problems. But specifically, when most people think about solar, does it work in Minnesota? I know obviously a lot of the folks here in the room have the answer to that, but it's a question that comes up often. This is a sundial solar project. And I can tell you today that Minnesota Solar Resources is massive in scale and infinite. MRES actually did a study on Minnesota's technical resource in terms of solar, and they actually found that solar is actually our single largest energy resource. The potential is enormous. It's over 150 times in Minnesota's electricity use. And on Minnesota rooftops, about 12,000 megawatts is technically available. Ground-mounted utility-scale solar has about 6,530,000 megawatts available. obviously you can see that this is not a renewable resource. Just to give you an idea too, a lot of people think about Minnesota and they think that the solar resource is actually less than what it is. If you take a look at the map there, you can see that Minnesota has a solar resource that's actually very similar to a lot of southern states, and actually our solar resource is even better than Germany. And of course, people love solar. Whenever we do polling on solar, people are incredibly interested in learning more about solar. They want it to be an increasing part of their electricity mix. However, this is actually in stark comparison to where solar deployment is in our state. We've got about 14 megawatts of solar employed across the state. Surprisingly, if you look at this list here, this is actually a list of states with a comparable solar resource to Minnesota in 2011. And as you can see, Minnesota falls fairly low on that list, even for states that have about the same kind of solar resource. And for 4 of those production states, Oregon, Tennessee, Louisiana, and Washington, they're actually seeing faster growth in grid-tied solar capacity, despite the fact that they also have lower electricity rates than Minnesota. A lot of times, when you think about where solar is taking off, you see it in places where the electricity prices are higher. And what we're seeing is that even when you factor that in, Minnesota's deployment is not where it should be.
Are these numbers possibly, is there a number for per capita? I've seen the,
let's see.
you know, like Pennsylvania's got much
Sure.
higher population.
These are not per capita, it's cumulative, but even, I mean, I know obviously there are per capita numbers out there as well. Yes?
Just a question. When you say performance, you don't mean energy production, you mean the amount installed?
I mean the amount installed, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Those 4 states, do they have a better tax incentive, you know?
It does have to do with policy, yes. What's that? I'm sure that they do, that's probably correct. I'm not sure if that's related to their solar deployment though. Oh, no. Well, it is the price, but yeah, usually what you see are in states where the price is higher, you'll see higher solar deployment just because it can compete more effectively. The point I'm making here is that even though these states have lower electricity rates on average in Minnesota, they are still outperforming us. So we sought out at Fresh Energy to figure out exactly why this was. So Fresh Energy actually worked with the Division of Energy Resources and the Department of Commerce and several other stakeholders through the U.S. Department of Energy Sunshot Program to look at exactly what were the barriers to solar deployment in Minnesota. We published this little report, which you can see here. And what we found was that the barriers were actually costing much more even than the equipment. So for example, if you look at the what are called the soft costs, these are basically not the cost of the technology itself, but the cost of the permitting, the financing, all the different steps that you have to go through to actually install a solar system. That was the majority of the cost for systems in the United States. And it's actually a big driver of the discrepancy in cost that you see between systems in the United States and, for example, Germany. So this is actually a slide that was taken from the Midwest briefing of America's Power Plan. There's actually a website, americaspowerplan.com, if you would like to take a look at it. But this is actually from a gentleman named James Newcomb with the Rocky Mountain Institute, looking at a study that had been conducted by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, basically illustrating exactly what this discrepancy was. So essentially, in Minnesota, if we could find the policies to help solar be deployed more rapidly and without as many barriers, we can actually bring down the cost, even though the cost of the actual physical equipment itself is already pretty low. Now, why community solar? Well, it turns out only 22% of Minnesota's residential roofs are actually optimal for solar due to shading, roof orientation, and that sort of thing. And of course, most folks know that a lot of people don't own the roof of their home. So Minnesota has about 2.3 million housing units. 67.5% of them are detached single-family homes. About 21.6% are in multifamily residential buildings with a common roof.
Can you go back a second to the
Yep.
last slide? Did you say can't or optimal? Right. So we were just trying to figure out if it was, that
Right.
it was optimal or.
That's not ownership.
That's
No,
right.
that's
doesn't-
the shading.
That is just purely roofs. That's not even looking at exactly what the ownership structure of those particular roofs are. So yeah, shading, orientation, those kinds of things. Exactly. So you have issues between, the roofs that actually are not in a good place to actually support a solar system, and then of course you have a large number of households in Minnesota that don't even own their roof necessarily to be able to install a solar project. And then of course you have the segment of Minnesotans that belong to homeowner associations, and of course those can also pose challenges. Roughly 1 in 5 Americans live in housing governed by a homeowner association. And homeowner associations have a large variety of rules in terms of actually installing solar systems. So what's a person to do? Well, the solution that we decided to do in Minnesota was actually something called community solar. And this is a graphic representation from Clean Energy Collective, who obviously did the Right Hennepin project that I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. The idea is that community solar is a large solar project that basically sells subscriptions to consumers. And consumers then receive their portion of the electricity generation from that project credited on their bill. Now, that's the kind of community solar that I'm referring to in this presentation. However, when people think about community solar, there's actually a number of different iterations. People have called a group bulk purchase, purchasing equipment for bulk discount community solar. Also crowdsourced funding for projects where securities regulations can actually apply. Some people call that community solar. They're actually a special LLC type arrangement, special entity model can be put together for states that don't allow community solar programs. It's a pretty complex legal arrangement. I can't tell you really much more about it except that it's complicated. And then of course there's the nonprofit model where churches and community centers, organizations like that kind of get together, put together a solar project, and then of course the benefits kind of usually go to the actual community organization. What I'm talking about when I say community solar is actually utility administered. So a utility or third party may own and administer a solar project with subscribers who purchase a portion of the project and are credited with their portion on their electricity bill. So did that make sense? Oh, good. So one of the questions that I get frequently is exactly how does the Xcel Energy program that we're looking at here actually differ from the Right Hennepin program that you've heard so much about? Well, I would say that there are some key similarities. One of which is, as I said, the customer actually subscribes to a portion of the project. They receive bill credit for their portion of the electricity, right? It's an arrangement that's kind of called virtual net metering, right? It's basically as if you have a project that's not located at your house, but it's treated basically as if it was net metering on your home. However, there are some differences. Right Hennepin, the project is actually owned by the utility. Clean Energy Collective helps to manage it. They actually have a monopoly over any additional community solar type projects that are offered. So when I say that, I mean that the utility gets to vote up or down whether or not there are additional projects that are offered in that particular service territory. The utility gets to determine the subscriber terms for Right Hennepin, also the approved projects. And most importantly to us, there's no real opportunity for a marketplace of community solar projects to develop. By contrast, with Xcel Energy's program, the statutory goal of this program was actually to create a community solar marketplace where we could have lots of different players, lots of different projects. Consumers can decide exactly what kind of a project best suits their needs. And more importantly, in the same way that under net metering, you obviously have to satisfy interconnection standards and all kinds of rules in terms of how you interconnect to the utility. But as to whether or not you can ultimately have a project on your roof, that's your decision. I mean, that's a decision that the utility does not itself make. So that is what I would say is probably the key difference between the Right Hennepin and Xcel programs. Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So, kind of the way you kind of said that, and especially and that for some of those places, that might be the model. Are you saying that the kind of investor-owned energy, Xcel Energy model is preferred by Fresh Energy and others over the, and I'm not,
Right.
trying to make bad guys of any of it, I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I guess what we really wanted to do with community shared solar was to actually, like I said, create a marketplace. We wanted to use this as a tool to rapidly deploy solar and allow people to participate in solar projects who would not otherwise be able to do so. And so therefore, it seemed more important to have kind of more of a rules of the road of a particular program, rather than to have the utility itself come up with a program that not everybody could necessarily play to, if that makes any sense. So we'll see exactly how all these projects go. The other thing I would say about the Wright-Hennepin project, while it's a great project, I obviously encourage anybody who's in the Wright-Hennepin service territory to participate. The way that they put together that project, they paired it with solar and batteries, and obviously that will drive up the cost. And so, we want to make sure that there are lots of different options for consumers, and then we also want to make sure that we are able to deploy as many projects as possible and get the basically the experience of that kind of deployment to help drive down costs. And so that's why we wanted to see a program that would allow lots of different kinds of projects to go forward. Yeah.
I was kind of under the impression that projects like Clean Energy Cycle were like kind of cooperative, so maybe they aren't owned by the utility, maybe they're owned by the consumer.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if they did it different for Renewable.
Yeah.
Are you know?
I'm not quite sure myself, actually.
I think that right now, on that, I talked to Arel about that after the construction, and I know that Arel did buy the equipment for install it, and buy anything, and CEC did most of the purchasing. And
Well, I think they do the purchasing, but then as people buy into it, it becomes a cooperative ownership.
Well, they're buying individual panels, is that what you're going to say? Or they're investment in individual panels, so
I'm not sure how they did it.
Right, right, but even so, I mean, obviously Wright-Hennepin approves the project in order for it to go forward, and it's not like there's a.
I'm getting the weeds.
What's that?
I'm getting the weeds.
No, actually, this is a key point.
She likes the weeds.
Yeah, Daryl.
Just one quick comment. The guy from Wright-Hennepin, the big wig, this big suit, this big a lot of money, he said the batteries cost money, but they are more valuable. They have a faster pay down than the solar itself.
Sure.
The energy, the dollar value of the batteries, because of capacity, exceeds, it's the better, basically pay off faster.
Right.
Reduces the net cost.
And certainly there's nothing in the model that's for Xcel Energy and other investor-owned utilities if they decide to do it. There's nothing that would prevent them from going that way. I'm just saying that there's lots of different ways that they can do it.
Unless we keep the community involved in the decisions, Xcel, well, like they played with the last go-round, keep batteries out, even though it's a nice benefit. They don't keep batteries out.
they won't give rebates for battery systems. So,
Right, and I mean, the interesting thing about community solar is that there's no incentive program paired with community solar per se. The folks that are familiar with the 2013 legislation know that there's obviously the Made in Minnesota incentive, which is for Minnesota panels under 40 kilowatts. And then there's also going to be an Xcel production-based incentive that's going to phase between solar rewards and this program. And that's for projects only under 20 kilowatts, and that's actually 20 kilowatts of DC, which is a little bit smaller than AC. So, anyway. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So I just wanted to put this up here very quickly too. So Fresh Energy is actually part of the Minnesota Clean Energy and Jobs campaign. They were the coalition that was putting forward this legislation. We worked with all the organizations that were part of this campaign, basically trying to make sure that we had some kind of consensus around exactly how this community solar legislation was going to go forward. And in doing so, we looked at some of the different community solar programs across the country. And we think that we have probably one of the better programs here in Minnesota, certainly a very strong program. So we're very happy to be able to have that for folks to participate in. So in terms of what the statute actually says about community solar for Xcel customers, Xcel is required to file a program on September 30th to the Public Utilities Commission, which can then approve, modify, or deny that application. I'm sure that some of you have probably already seen Xcel has made that filing already. The guidelines under which the community solar program is operated is that basically projects may be up to 1 megawatt in size. That's the same size limit as the new net metering cap, and when value of solar comes in online, that's going to be the same kind of size cap. I'm sure I lost about half of my audience right there. But essentially, the 1 megawatt size cap was meant to be parallel with other policies that were passed in 2015. The facility has to have at least 5 subscribers, with no subscriber having more than 40% of subscriptions. It can be owned and operated by a third party or by the utility. It can take advantage of Xcel's production-based incentive or the Made in Minnesota incentive. And this is important because obviously Xcel is proposing something a little bit different in its program. But the statute says that there can be no cap on the total number of community solar projects or the total system-wide capacity. Yes.
On the subscription, is that a panel? Is one panel a subscription?
Minimum subscription is 200 watts. That's actually what I was saying.
That's panel.
Okay.
Yes, 200 watts. It's itty bitty. It is itty bitty, yeah. So the reason that we decided to go with 200 watts was we wanted to make this an affordable solution for people. Like, we wanted people to be able to have a very low entry barrier to getting into these projects. So yes, 200 watts is not a lot. If you figure about $4 a watt or so, it's $800, which is it's a much more affordable project than, for example, 1 kilowatt entry level, type situation. So in terms of subscribers, subscribers can own subscriptions equal to more than 120% of their annual energy use. Yes, please.
There's been a lot of discussion since September 30th about Xcel's interpretation of the applicable retail rate, which is the language in the statute. Can you elaborate on some of the legislative intent?
Sure. And we are going to go straight into the weeds with abandon. Can I just go through this very quickly and then I can come back to that? So let's see, the other parts I wanted to mention very quickly about subscribers, obviously we talked about the crediting on their monthly bill. This is another important part right down here. Subscribers actually must reside in a contiguous county to the project that they are subscribing to. We actually fought very hard for service territory-wide. We obviously weren't successful. In Colorado, just to give you an idea, Xcel actually requires their customers to be in the same county, so we can get a little bit more, but that's where that's at. So what's next? PUC obviously must approve the program. They filed their application. Significant issues include, one is actually the compensation rate that's going to be afforded, and I'll touch on that again in a moment. I would say that probably the most obvious issue is that even though the statute says that there should be no limitation on the total capacity of community solar projects, Xcel has suggested, actually I put 2 megawatts, that's not quite right, it's 2.5 megawatts, quarterly cap for the first 2 years of the program. And I would say that this is probably going to be the element of their program that attracts the most attention from the community, because I'm just curious, how many of you out here have experiences with solar rewards? Anybody? It's a really popular program.
Yeah.
A lot of people like it. Can you hear the sarcasm in my voice? So I think that one of the significant concerns is going to be Xcel trying to manage 2.5 megawatts worth of community solar applications every quarter, every 4 months, and trying to take applications as they come in. The other interesting thing about how they're going to be administering this cap is that once they run out, so for example, if they have only 300 kilowatts left in their cap, they are only going to take programs up to 300 kilowatts. So if you want to put in a larger project, and a lot of developers are going to want to put in larger projects because of course they can take advantage of economies of scale, they are going to have to wait until the next round to actually apply. And so, I mean, just from a logistical standpoint, it seems that that is going to be very tough to administer, I would think. So there's that portion of it. Then of course you have the issues related to making the projects economic themselves. So as part of the legislative legislative package that we worked with the members of the Clean Energy and Jobs campaign, we actually advocated for a broad suite of incentives that would incentivize the entire, basically solar industry up to, I think it was 2 megawatts, different sized incentives. And what we ended up with, unfortunately, were only these 2 incentives for made in Minnesota projects under 40 kilowatts, and the Xcel incentive for projects under 20 kilowatts, which obviously is great. I mean, the residential part of the sector does need those incentives, but what happened was that now we don't have incentives for the projects between 40 kilowatts and a megawatt. And hopefully I haven't lost too many people at this point. So basically those projects that are larger than what the current net metering cap is, but still fall within the brand new net metering program, that 1 megawatt cap, don't have an incentive to help them along. Yes?
I heard Stacy Miller express an opinion that subscribers can apply for those even on those large scale community solar. As long as the subscribers aren't subscribing more than 20 or 40 kilowatts.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very much an open question at this point.
And yeah, I've heard the opposite opinion too. Like,
I'm
you
sure
can't
you
do
have.
that. Yeah, that's a rulemaking thing that has to get sorted out.
It is a rulemaking thing. The other part of that to think about too is exactly how quickly then those incentives will actually be exhausted. Because obviously if you have a lot of community solar projects, you have people that are subscribing to all of their, we just have to think the incentive pots are obviously not unlimited. And so I think the policy question before our community is figuring out exactly what is the way to best allocate those kinds of incentives.
Yeah, it took 2 hours to use them up this year.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, for solar rewards, yes. Yeah. The retail?
Yeah, the retail rate, it's also, I think, a 2.5 megawatt quarterly cap?
Yes, I actually just
She
said that.
mentioned
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. And the recs belong to Xcel under their proposal, not, because the company could be maybe the developer, maybe a subscriber into the company.
Right, no, I totally agree. So one of the things I think folks are going to be really looking at are the different revenue streams, I guess you could look at it that way. One is going to be exactly what is the rate that's actually compensated to owners and subscribers for the community solar. The rate that Xcel is proposed is what they call blended retail rate. I think they're basically using their net metering, net excess generation rate. And they have 2 different rates, one for basically 1 6-month segment out of the year, one for another 6-month segment. And then they also have it broken down into customers who are billed on a kilowatt hour basis and then demand metered customers. And I'm sure that there's even more of you guys. So yes, go ahead, Jay.
And the SREC, it says they get them, but it doesn't say they get them free or any price in
Right,
particular.
and I actually think that that's another point too. So traditionally in the past, if the renewable energy credit actually passes to the utility, it's been under the context of an incentive program. There's no incentive program here. And so, I mean, this is going to be one of the issues that I think people are going to be taking a very close look at moving forward. The other issue that I wanted to mention too in terms of making projects economic is the unsubscribed energy. So essentially what that means is if you have a project manager who has a small portion of their project that is unsubscribed, it doesn't have a subscriber to actually soak up that energy, if you can think of it that way. Xcel is proposing to not, they would buy all the energy, but they would not compensate the facility, the project manager, basically, for that energy. And so I think that's going to be a question, yeah. John's eyes are getting big. I think that's another question too that we are going to be taking a look at. Yes, please.
My understanding of the process of this in terms of the, not backroom discussions, but the background discussions,
Yes.
is this was a compromise. The utilities are fearing loss of control.
Right.
And this is a way for them to stay in the game. Can you comment on that? Was there any possibility of a program that was independent of the utility, in a sense? And then that leads to the other thing. This is wonderful if you're in Xcel territory, but
Right.
the rest of us
Right.
are out of luck. So is there any avenue for getting something that is untied from the utility?
Well, I'll take your...
Because my sense is and a company like Xcel is going to drag this on and on. They're going to resist to the bitter end of their business model. And it's just going to be a constant drip.
Well, There's a couple of answers to that. I'm going to take your last question first, and then we can revisit your first question if that's okay. For folks who are outside of Xcel's service territory, so first of all, community solar is actually optional for other investor-owned utilities, and so they can submit a program. So that means, I guess, if enough people actually, pressure, for example, the utility to offer a program, suggest that it's a good idea, those kinds of things, you can certainly do that. For folks in munis and co-ops, obviously some of munis and co-ops are, they've either launched a program like Bright Hennepin. I've heard rumors of other munis and co-ops thinking about launching such a program, and so I would say that munis and co-ops know that their customers are interested in this. So it will be interesting to see exactly how that permutates. In the future, it would be ideal for, I think, muni and co-op customers to have the same kind of opportunities that Xcel customers will enjoy. That is to basically have a program under which, there's far more variety in terms of projects that can be offered. And can you restate your first question very quickly?
Well, you're hitting most of it.
Yeah.
But the gist of this is, as long as it's some kind of partnership,
right.
The business model of utilities, I've had utility executives say this outright. They're looking in the rearview mirror at a 30 to 50 year bond commitment to shareholders.
Sure.
And as long as they're looking in that rearview mirror, which they have to,
right.
they're going to be dragging their feet on this.
Well, I would say that Colorado, obviously, the comparison is not apples to apples because they have a pretty rich incentive in Colorado. Their programs sell out very, very quickly. But I will say that Xcel has a successful community solar program in Colorado. And in fact, they own some of the programs there. I think that they're going to be interested in owning some of the programs here, even though they haven't intimated such in their actual application. So I think they're interested in making this work. The other thing, obviously, is also this value of solar arrangement. So there's a stakeholder process that's underway. It's essentially to figure out, and I'm sure that you kind of know about this, but for those who haven't been following the process closely, it's designed to be a replacement for net metering for solar projects. And essentially the arrangement, instead of your meter going backwards every time your system is producing energy, essentially what would happen is that you buy all of your electricity from the utility, you sell all of the production from your facility to the utility, and essentially it shows up on your bill as a bill credit instead of your meter actually going backwards. And the idea is that the utility is thinking that this will help prevent customers who are generating very close to what they actually use from getting out of the charges that help them to pay for the entire system. So there's a portion of the kilowatt hours that everybody pays for that helps to pay for the distribution lines, the transmission lines, all of those different costs. And so their thought is this value of solar with what they're calling the buy all, sell all arrangement is going to be what helps them to overcome this utility model barrier that you're referring to. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah. Another piece of evidence that just came in today is saying that this is going to be a long, drawn-out battle. There are cases now in California popping up where utilities are denying customers who add any battery backup to their systems. They're resisting. And I just get this sense that as long as it's a compromise mode, which is generally good, and given what's going on in Washington, we like this compromise stuff. We're not going to get to where we need to be. The distributed energy revolution, in effect, that's possible out there is always going to be a little bit stifled.
I think it's always going to be a little bit moderated depending on the stakeholders that are at the table. And the fact that utilities are seriously thinking about exactly what it means to have 5% solar penetration, for example, in California, and how they have to change their business model to accommodate that, it just seems light years away from where we were when, for example, in 1981 or 1983, when Minnesota's net metering law was passed. So, I mean, it might not be the progress that all of us want to see as quickly as we had hoped, but it certainly is progress. I mean, the other question is, now we're talking about, distributed generation sources like solar, but obviously some of those same issues also arise with, you mentioned batteries. That's true. And so the interesting question is going to be exactly how utilities kind of deal with that question, and if they use a concept like buy all, sell all, or value of solar to kind of address those kinds of issues too. Yes.
Yeah, I think to respond to that a little bit, I think we have to have a compromise for a couple different reasons. One is just practically, Xcel's not going to stop being a stakeholder in the conversation, but
Right.
more than that, if you look at what Germany's done, they've gone a little bit too far almost, where they're really starting to affect the rate that everybody's paying, and there's a potential for backlash because they're doing some installations because of lobbying efforts that don't make sense and don't really have high value to the grid. So I think the value of solar that is being discussed in the state is really important to go beyond just a feed-in tariff model and identify the highest value solar and doing that first.
Well, another interesting aspect of the feed-in tariff model too, as I understand it in Germany, is that I think that the industrial customers are actually exempt from the charges essentially associated with the feed-in tariff, and so that's another policy question, right? I mean, here in Minnesota, certainly we have industries that are considered globally competitive. They are uniquely sensitive to energy costs, right? And so in fact, some of those industries we've actually exempted from the solar energy standard based on that argument. But then we have to kind of ask ourselves, if we're looking at the Germany example, where costs are going up, in part because, certain segments of customers are excluded, how do we think about that? What is the right way to answer that question?
If you don't mind, I just wanted to point out that Xcel was in favor of community solar. They testified for it,
Yes.
published in Star Tribune that they were in favor. So they're not although there's some things that are not totally everything we want, but they're cooperating.
Yeah, and I would say the key difference between the proposal that they put forward and the proposal we put forward was they wanted to model it very much on their Colorado program. And then it goes through their integrated resource plan, which in Minnesota can take up to 15 months, right? That's a very long time. And of course, it's capped. So I think in Colorado, they have 18 megawatts right now that's actually allowed in Colorado, and that goes out in 9 megawatt chunks a year. And I think that there are different incentives for different sizes as well. And so here in Minnesota, we don't have the incentives, but we also don't have a cap, and we don't have to wait for an integrated resource plan before the next chunk of community solar has to grow. So that is the advantage of having just a program application go through the PUC as opposed to an entire integrated resource plan. But yes, I think you're right. I think Xcel is interested in moving this program forward.
And to the contrast, no one else would support that. So we don't have it anywhere else. No other utilities would support it.
Yeah.
So I think, Xcel does deserve some credit for being cooperative, even though it's not everything we have.
I agree. Yes, that is a very good point. Yes.
If I understand correctly, this whole conversation is about programs that you get into and then get a credit on the bill.
Right.
What about if somebody wants to make a cooperative that sells energy straight to a utility, but doesn't credit bills, and just, people get their money back by return on investment? How does that, is that at all addressed by this? How is that fit?
No, I mean, I think that that's actually, I don't know that it needs to be addressed by this. I mean, that sounds like a pretty much straight up power purchase agreement kind of situation. And then the folks who receive benefits from that power purchase agreement in terms of profits, they would probably have to deal with securities issues and things like that. They would have to figure out exactly what kinds of tax implications they have for, what they get from that project. So this is meant to be, really a virtual net metering program, so that people, can get the benefits of having solar on their roof without having solar on their roof, essentially. Yes.
On the, is there a limit on how many subscriptions there is in the MRES?
There's no limit on the total number of subscriptions, but there is, it's according to your annual energy use, so it's 120% of what you use annually. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that includes, if you already have a rooftop solar system, that includes, so the total aggregate of the solar production that you are using cannot be more than 120% of what your annual energy use is.
Now that that's in the law, what do we do when you plug in your brand new EV now, you're already at 100%?
I am that case.
So, I mean, yeah.
I have a real pleasure to offer.
So we have to buy their energy for, their dirty energy for a whole year before we can plug in some solar? Because we're capped at 120%, now your load goes up because you're plugging in EV. and you got rid of your gasoline car.
It's meant to be an average, and so, I mean, I think that the law is prescriptive in terms of how that average is actually derived, and I have the statute actually in my bag over there, and we can take a look at it, but it's not just like a one-time.
It's a historical.
Yeah.
So you have to wait a year to get there if you got.
No, you don't have to wait a year. They can also, there's a couple different ways they can do it. If you have lived in another place, I think that there's a way that you can possibly use that, or there was another way that you can basically estimate it, but you don't have to wait a year to, derive exactly what you're averaging.
You show them your invoice to the EV, and they might let you buy some more solar then?
Well, I would have to look at the statute. We can answer that together in a little bit.
So I am basically this example.
Yeah.
So I have, for a little over a year, I have a solar system on my roof. It produces about 90% of my electricity. We bought a Nissan Leaf in July, and so we started drawing more electricity.
Sure.
So you're saying, let's just pretend that it was still, even with the Nissan Leaf, it was still 90%.
Right.
I still can get 30%, up to 100 and then 120 right there, so 20 from a community solar. So I could subscribe to Northern Sun down the road for me when they have their system for that additional 30%.
Yes.
But if the EV, so if the EV, let's say the EV brings my, the solar production down to 75%, so that I will have 45%. Oh, interesting, thanks.
Well, no. I'm acknowledging the complexity of the situation. I am not saying that is the solution.
Okay.
I think that actually,
It's a good question.
It's an excellent question.
Because more of that's happening.
The rules haven't been written yet about exactly how that would be considered, I don't think.
So when value solar happens, Diana will be, all of her energy she uses will just be sold to Xcel, and then Xcel will pay her for the solar she produces, so technically you could still get 120% from the community solar and own solar in your house.
No,
But I
solar is still 120% limit.
And value solar is not going to apply because I already have that new contract.
Right.
I'm locked into a 20-year contract, solar rewards, all of that, the rest.
That's right. Yeah, value solar is only for new interconnections after it's adopted. I'll go with the back first and then.
Xcel has cautioned us about,
Can you speak up louder?
Xcel has cautioned us about signing up subscribers for 120% of their energy because they fear that customers might produce more than their 120% and not get compensated based on exceeding that max.
They zero it out after a year. So if you overproduce, you don't get the extra after a year. That's right in the statute.
Right.
So
Here's the money.
I think the Xcel's efforts with using 2 meters points to what their real intent is. They want all of your electricity use to count to your capacity, whatever you use, and then your allowable limit is what you is 120% of that, what can be credited to solar. So it doesn't matter EV or not, if you're using that electricity, they want to count that in your total, and then it's 120% of that.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Because their argument is they want to be compensated for their infrastructure.
Right.
And so they don't want the scenario which you raised, which they're scared of, is people putting solar on the grid and paying them nothing. That's what they're scared of.
Well, then if you go complain about profits are too low and we have this much revenue and we have no profits, so we got to help us.
Yes.
You're like, no.
Okay, all right, excellent. Well, that's good, because I'm actually towards the end of my perfect. So I have here just a couple, it's hard, I know that there's a lot of people in here that are really interested in being part of a community solar project, and that's why you're here. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of guidance for you. I will call out, let's see, Trevor, where are you, Trevor? There he is. Trevor with certs and Diana McEwen with certs has been doing a lot of work in terms of figuring out how to kind of get people together and move them along this path, and so I would certainly refer you guys, Trevor has sort of a shock look on his face.
I think we're gathering questions at this point.
Yes.
Not all the answers.
Right, right. And so we'll know a lot more of the answers once we actually have some program rules by which, people can actually operate. Yes, please.
If you're interested in contacting a community solar developer, please go to mncoms.org. communitysolar.com. There's a subscribe button there.
That's one of the vendors. There's certainly other vendors, just to put that out there too, but yes, absolutely. So, yes, the couple of considerations I put together here very briefly without knowing a lot about exactly how the program is going to be structured is obviously you want to gather your group of subscribers. You want to figure out who your project developer is going to be, and obviously your site. Your site is going to also kind of determine exactly what your pool of subscribers are going to be, since obviously they have to be in a contiguous county. Remember I talked about that before. And then if you are a nonprofit, so for example, if you're here on behalf of your church, you might consider engaging with a third-party developer to leverage the investment tax credits, figure out how exactly to use that. So the other thing I wanted to mention to you here very briefly is that Fresh Energy has actually put together a solar opportunity series on community solar. It's actually being co-sponsored by CERTS and let's see, Interfaith Power and Light as well. You can actually register at fresh-energy.org/solar series, or just go to fresh-energy.org. You'll see the link on there as well. And we would encourage you to come out for that. It's going to be October 24th, which is coming up in a couple of weeks already over at the Science Museum of Minnesota. We're going to be focusing more on, well, we're going to be talking broadly about community solar as an investment vehicle on how we can, build wealth within neighborhoods. We're also going to be talking a little bit about how the program is kind of evolving at that point. It's going to be moderated by Amy Woodhaven of the McKnight Foundation. We have a number of knowledgeable panelists, and so I invite you to join us. And then I have a couple of reports here for those of you who really want to put your visors on and kind of geek out. There's some community solar background report, which obviously you guys are familiar with in terms of the different kinds of community solar in Minnesota. And then also, if you really want to get into the weeds, model rules to shared renewable energy programs. IREC actually released that not too long ago, and so you can actually see that as well. And then, of course, you can obviously become a member of Fresh Energy, right? I would get in trouble if I wouldn't say this slide. So we've obviously been working very hard on the community solar program and the legislation. We're working very hard on the implementation. So, and then we're also obviously moving forward a number of other solar-related policies from the legislative session and through the regulatory arena. So, thank you very much.
I'll start our board meeting.
Oh, great.
So I want to talk to Erin. She will be hanging around here for the next 15 minutes. And also MRES is going to kind of be the middle ground aggregator for community solar. We have a link on our page. If you're interested in getting more information on the projects that are happening, you can sign up on our website. So thank you, Erin, for talking.
Laura, give me a second for announcement.
Okay.
For additional information, in addition to what Erin got there, you can read what's on the public docket for that. Xcel reports are already up there and open to any public comments. And those are actually pretty influential. Last year, they usually get like 4 or 5. Last year they had 40 in solar rewards, and that made a huge impact on the outcome. So if you don't know how to do that, or and you want to, you can contact me, Jan H, and then Renewable. Contact Laura. She probably knows how to do it too.
There's a video on our website.
And yeah, it's definitely worth doing. I mean, it doesn't have to be all that detailed. You could say, yeah, I want more community solar. 10 megawatts isn't enough per year, or whatever your opinion is. That all matters.